my presentation, and it's more presentation and not a elaborated paper as Maxi's, it will focus on the security cooperation nexus of Brazil's presence in Latin America, mostly South America, and it will unfold in two parts. A first part, which will consist of a summarized account of Brazil's regional foreign policy since the ending of the Cold War. I believe, and I will try to very briefly summarize the three different stages in which this presence has unfolded. And the second part, which probably will be more controversial, I hope, in the second part I will try to address the current state of affairs of Brazil's regional presence, and then suggesting three non-excludent and conceptual approaches to follow and understand the present developments we see. From a very summarized perspective of our evolution in the region since the ending of the Cold War, I tried to identify three different moments. A first period that goes from mid-80s to late 90s, a second period which starts out in 2002 up to 2015, and the last stage which starts out in 2016 up to now. The first period of our regional, Latin American regional policy in Brazil's foreign policy was a period of an expanded agenda, a period in which cooperation in the region was understood as a build-up of a process of regionalization, a first moment in which regionalization was understood as stable expectations, common interests, shared democratic values, and the idea that shared autonomous foreign policies would have an important impact regarding the relationship and regarding the buildup of a common regional stance and position in a changing world order. Open multilateral world economy was on the way. We were working on regional and a new agenda of regional cooperation. Relationship between Brazil and Argentina was expanded on a positive agenda, and at that point, though our economic conditions were very weak and vulnerable, we were working on a common idea of regional integration and of regional institutionalism. This period unfolded into a second moment, which is a moment now of shared perspectives regarding the absorption of global liberal policies. At the same time, a loosely knit security community starts taking place. We work on the idea of bilateral and unilateral initiatives. Brazil is deeply committed to the idea of working on a peaceful presence in the region. The nuclear agreement with Argentina at the time, the quadripartite nuclear agreement, was a major benchmark. Brazil, at the same time, works upon the idea of consolidating a custom union with its neighbors. It's the years of Mercosur going through different moments, the years in which Brazil is committed also slowly to South American identity, slowly moving in that direction. And of course, we're talking about the 90s. We're talking about a period of adjustment policies, shared views on adjustment policies, on the process of connection of Brazil to different regional and global security regimes. The second period, which I would say starts in 2002 to 15, is a period which coincides with a transformed political landscape in South America. It's the period of the expansion of progressive governments meaning the shared view of a post-neoliberal policies committed to social inclusion, the articulation of positive social inclusion policies with the buildup of a South American community, first called CASA and then called UNASUR. The idea that there would be an articulation in the case of Brazil, a positive articulation between an assertive foreign policy, the buildup of strong linkages and commitments with neighbors in the region, and carrying forward a very ambitious global aspirations as an emerging power. We're talking about the years in which Brazil works together with South Africa, with India, at first in IESP, then the years in which BRICS starts being configured as an option in a multipolar world order, the years in which the articulation between a regional policy and an ambitious and an active regional policy is articulated with global aspirations and, of course, with a new set of commitments, responsibilities, and presence in multilateral institutions. Global governance is the area, and in different areas, in different segments of global governance, institutions are now a part of Brazil's affirmative foreign policy. And Brazil identifies itself as a regional power, but at the same time, the buildup of this presence is not conflictive, but it brings up new tensions in the region regarding the articulation of an identity as a regional power with the buildup of regional leadership. The question of leadership, which Maxi brought up in the case of South Africa, is very it has a strong presence in our case as well. And of course, in the tension between the identity and the self-perceptions in Brazil, in Brazilian diplomatic circles, and the perceptions from the neighbors, and of course the expectations from the neighbors is also an area of tension, an area of ambiguity for Brazilians, for Brazilian foreign policy at the time. In my first idea of this presentation, I underlined the importance of the participation of Brazil in peacekeeping initiatives, particularly MINUSTAH at Haiti, which was at the time understood as a multilateral, but also a regional initiative, and Brazil assuming the military command of this initiative, which lasted from 2004 to 2017. But this is not the only initiative, which also illustrates Brazilians' new identity in the region. Brazil's articulation and Brazil's efforts for the buildup of a South American Defense Council must be underlined as well. Brazil's agenda in South-South cooperation, in which Latin America and South America had a very important part, and a portfolio, an extended and diversified agenda of initiatives in South-South and regional South-South cooperation at the time were extremely important for the buildup of soft power initiatives, which of course had a major importance in the articulation with a new diplomatic presence in the region. This period is a period of virtue regarding a period of capacity, of a new sort of capacity Brazil shows regarding its regional policies and regarding the efforts to build up a security and economic nexus in Brazil and in Brazil's interpretation of regionalism and in the articulation between a positive agenda in regional security and regional cooperation. The third period starts in 2016, is a period in which what we observe is the shrinking, the disarticulation, the emptying, the gradual dismantle of the previous period. It's institutional dismantlement. It's political dismantlement. It is an intentional and a political intentional move towards a new agenda, which basically is built upon the negative and build upon the necessity, the need to destroy the bridges that could identify Brazil's presence with the efforts and with the agenda which was built up during the previous period. And Brazil, little by little, and sometimes not that gradually, built a distance from its commitments to South American regionalism. Brazil contributes to turn UNASUR into a zombie institution in the sense of emptying its political significance, maintains its presence in Haiti at MINUSTAH, but much more now on an individualistic stance with a very shallow articulation with other military contingents of the region. Brazil does not get involved in Colombian peace process. Brazil strongly commits itself to the process of marginalization of Venezuela in the intra-regional chessboard. The economic impact of these policies and of these moves are immediate regarding trade flows, the decrease of trade flows in the region, and regarding Brazil's trade presence. South America decreases its importance for Brazilians' exports. The idea that the regional foreign policy of Brazil in economics, being trade or any kind of cooperation initiatives, and the articulation of this presence with security interests and security commitments is completely abandoned by our foreign ministry and by our diplomacy. This process starts in 2016 and opens up the space and the possibilities for its continuation once we start a new government in 2019. What I want to underline is that this process had been started before, and it really facilitates, it really creates the conditions to move on to a new stage of Brazilian foreign policy in which the region is reconfigured as an area of building up positive agendas, positive cooperation initiatives, and of course, an important strategic significance for the Brazilian foreign policy. And this means that the areas that Brazilian foreign policies and Brazilians' presence in the region assumes a new profile and a new significance for the region and for Brazilians' foreign policy. I would say that Brazil's current foreign policy has no place for soft power. And this means that the buildup of our presence in the region now is much more connected to what Maxime called the geopolitical logic than the identity and the cooperative agenda of our previous years of foreign policy, being the period before 2002 or being the 13 years from 2002 to 2015. In this last period, what we observe is a process of securitization of our presence in the region. And this securitization of our presence in the region can be observed in different ways, in different areas. One is our presence at the border, our presence at the northern border, the importance of the securitiization of our presence in the buildup of a positive agenda in the borders, particularly regarding the migration process coming from Venezuela and the policies adopted by Brazilian government to address this the migration flows, the expanded migration flows. Now, what we call the Operação Acolhida, which is carried forward by our defense ministry, and it is at this moment a peace operation in our own territory, and a peace operation in our own territory with the conduction of the defense ministry, and of course with all the implications it has to in the area of in the northern area of our country. Another clear indication of the different times of our regional policy has to do with implications of the changes which are taking place in our nuclear policy, and the changes that the nuclear policies taking place will immediately be observed and receive some kind of reaction with our main partner in regional and shared regional position stances, which has been Argentina. And this is a clear indication also of the expansion of a securitization approach regarding dear initiatives of cooperation and of confidence building initiatives of our relationship with our neighbors. To address the current developments of our foreign policy and its implications and its impact in the region, I would suggest three different possibilities which are not excluded. The first one is a very, very known approach to us, which is the approach which underlines the importance of hegemonic stability. While Brazil strongly contested this approach in previous years, it seems now to embrace the idea that relationship with the United States ought to be the main strategic move and to build up its regional presence in South America. The importance of this approach to understand what is currently being carried forward is that even though the U.S. does not possess a predominance of power, it is treated and perceived by our foreign ministry as if. The importance of ideologies, of worldviews to compensate the evidence of limitations of the political economy factors, let's understand it as China, and of course the presence of China in our region. This is linked to the security implications and to ideological motivations. So what we observe is that and if we go to the numbers, if we go to the data, we will see that the relative importance of the United States in investment, in trade, has no comparison to the importance of the expansion of the importance of China, but definitely from a security perspective and a political ideological perspective, the idea that hegemonic stability guaranteed by the U.S. should be the main pillar of our presence in the region, even though we do not, we could go on and on because there are different kinds of alignments to build up in our region with the U.S., but in the case of Brazil, it has basically to do and is basically nurtured by ideological and worldview convergence. The second approach is a very well-known approach in the history of our foreign policy and of our regional policy, which is that of an enduring rivalry, and the idea of an enduring rivalry with Argentina. Brazil-Argentina relations have had a past of strong rivalry, but I don't have time to go into this, but anyway, it is extremely easy on the side by the operators of our foreign policy to press the automatic button of enduring rivalry with Argentina. No, it's just a question of having this preference in foreign policy. The elements, the institutional memory is there, the collective memory of our institutions are there, and it's not very clear what will nurture this new season of rivalry, but it's clear that it is being searched for, and it is part now of the preferences of the political preferences of our region, of our regional foreign policy. It's not very clear how can Argentina and Brazil hurt each other at this point. Intra-Mercosur already has decreased in its importance for both economies. Argentina will not be striving and competing for a preference relationship with the United States in the next years, but this can be built up just as a political identity, as part of the political identity of our foreign policy in the next years, creating on the side of Argentina, of course, a revival of the memories of Peronism, of the difficulties Peronism has always had with Brazil. The last approach, I find this quite interesting. I ran into a South African author, Dion Geldentroys. And Dion Geldentroys has written extensively on self-isolation, voluntary isolation, and friendliness in the world. And the idea that isolation comes hand in hand with nationalism in a diffuse structure of power. Isolation is maybe or not associated with authoritarian regimes. And the idea that, and his writings, the diplomacy of isolation, which was developed for, it's comparative, but of course he was thinking of South Africa and the apartheid regime, really struck me as an interesting contribution to understand, at least in part, our present foreign policy and the impact this foreign policy will have in the region. Environment and human rights are the two flags, the two areas, the two topics which seem to mostly nurture our self-isolation process, which is building up and which is voluntary. It is not forced. It may have a major implication regarding the next years of our presence and lack of interest and relevance in the world as a regional power. The politics of international seclusion. The essence is to cut itself off, off foreign commitments, and to keep a low level. And it can manifest it in different areas: political, diplomatic, economic, military, social, cultural. You have very little need for foreign policy. You don't need the idea that isolation is built up on a shallow foreign policy with very specific interests and aims. It has domestic roots, and it expands in the diffuse structure of power. States that are well removed from areas of conflict and enjoy a degree of relative economic and military self-sufficiency, but fear that external commitments may endanger their political, economic, and social values, may find in isolation the best way to uphold their values and realize their aspirations. It looks so familiar. And I definitely think that this kind of approach will be useful to think of what's going on in Brazil's foreign policy in the next years. I do not wish to end this presentation soaking in dystopia. This weekend I watched a documentary on Garcia Marquez and his explanation of solitude and of 100 years of solitude. And the idea that when we have such a long solitude, there is no second opportunity. Well, I do hope we have a second opportunity to reverse this reality and to get back on track as we should. Thank you very much.